From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Donald Trump goes behind the counter at a Pennsylvania McDonald's restaurant while taking jabs at Kamala Harris and raising the minimum wage and franchise policies as points of political debate. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, columnists Bill McGurn and Alicia Finley. A striking image from the presidential campaign trail this weekend was Donald Trump in his trademark red tie and a blue apron, manning the fry machine at a McDonald's restaurant in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, handing bags of food through the drive-through window, chatting up supporters. The genesis of this event was Trump's repeated claim that Kamala Harris is lying when she says that she worked at a McDonald's restaurant briefly in college some 40 years ago. Here is Kamala Harris telling that story in 2019.
I worked at McDonald's. I was a student when I was working at McDonald's. There was not a family relying on me to pay the rent, put food on the table, and keep the bills paid by the end of the month. But the reality of McDonald's is that a majority of the folks who are working there today are relying on that income to sustain a household and a family. And if we want to talk about these golden arches being a symbol of the best of America, well, the arches are falling short.
And here's Donald Trump this weekend.
You actually have worked at McDonald's now versus...
Now I have worked at McDonald's. I've now worked for 15 minutes more than Kamala. Okay, she never worked here. I've now worked 15 minutes more than Kamala. So worked at McDonald's. I'm going to say, because she's lying Kamala, that's why. Why would she lie? She shouldn't lie about it. McDonald's confirmed 4 times now she never worked here. But let's not talk about that. It's an amazing business, it's an amazing country, and we're going to make America greater than ever before.
Bill, obviously we have no way of verifying a short-term job that Kamala Harris says she had 40 years ago, though to my mind, it would be a weird thing to make up that you worked at McDonald's if you hadn't. What I find interesting, though, is the jockeying over this Trump campaign event. The McDonald's in question in Pennsylvania was closed to the public. The drive-through customers had been vetted beforehand. And so critics are calling this a stunt by Trump. Vice presidential nominee Tim Walz said that Trump is cosplaying as a McDonald's worker. He said that his running mate actually worked at a McDonald's. She didn't go and pander and disrespect McDonald's workers by standing there in your red tie and taking a picture. And Bill, I guess my thought is, yes, this was a staged event by the Trump campaign, but campaigns are full of staged events, photo ops, candidates always putting on hard hats and whatnot. And by the way, there have been 2 failed assassination attempts against Donald Trump in the past 4 months. So he can't really just show up at a regular operating McDonald's and start poking his head through the drive-through window.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely, Kyle. Yes, it was a campaign stunt, and they pulled it off brilliantly, partly because the people that don't like Trump melted down over it. It was such a silly thing for them to do. Speaking with the authority of a former McDonald's employee, I too worked there in the summer. I can prove it. There are pictures and so forth. It's very telling. McDonald's is a symbol. It's one of the symbols of America, best known. 1 out of 8 Americans has worked at McDonald's. And for many people, that's their introduction to the workforce, which means introduction to showing up on time, being neat, learning to follow orders, deal with customers. It's an invaluable experience. And I think, the only time Kamala Harris talks about it, it was, I think, in the picket line when she was complaining about the wages for McDonald's workers. It was a fight for 15 last time. There was no sense of what McDonald's contributes to the economy. I think Trump is fuzzy on this too with the minimum wage, but not all McDonald's workers there are breadwinners. I think actually very few are. And a lot of people value the convenience. I know when I was in college and working there, I valued it because they let me work really early mornings And I had another job that I could work in the afternoon. So for flexibility, there were some retired people there just working to keep busy and meet people. There are all sorts of reasons. And I think Kamala Harris favors the kind of regulations that reduces that flexibility and actually gives the companies incentives to replace workers with machines.
The minimum wage is one of the issues, the policy issues that has been brought up by this campaign stop. Trump was asked if he supported raising the minimum wage, and he dodged that question, saying that these people work hard, they're great, and I just saw something, a process that's beautiful, unquote. And fair enough, there is something beautiful about a perfect McDonald's French fry. But the data, I think, seem to bear out the argument that Bill is making here. Pennsylvania's minimum wage is $7.25 per hour. That's the federal minimum wage. And if you go look at the reporting from the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry that has an analysis, it says in 2023, there were about 68,000 Pennsylvania workers earning the minimum wage or less. It is something like 1.1% of all workers. And there's some detailed information here about who they are, Alicia. More than half are under the age or the age 24 years old, 86% never married, 94% no children, almost half had family incomes of $75,000 or more than a third had annual family incomes of $150,000 or more. So this supports the notion, Alicia, that there are many people at that minimum wage who are getting their first work experience, getting their foot in the door, getting on the ladder of private sector employment. And by the way, that is why there are many workers, even at places like McDonald's, fast food restaurants, who are making way more than the minimum wage. The Bureau of Labor Statistics data says that fast food workers in Pennsylvania make an average of $13.20 per hour. And so, Alicia, that is a different story than the argument that you heard from Kamala Harris in the clip at the top, that we have to raise the minimum wage because that is what is providing food on the table for these breadwinners and their children and their families.
Right. So the data, as you said, completely contradict what Harris said. Most people who start out at these jobs making minimum wage get raises within a month or two and are then making well more. And very few make the federal minimum wage. Some people still make the state minimum wages in various states, and they range all the way to about $16.50 an hour. But the problem is when these states, when they raise their minimum wages, teen and youth unemployment actually increases. I mean, the case in point has been California, which has raised its minimum wage to $16 an hour from $12 in 2020. And $12, by the way, is still higher than in most states. But in the last 2 years, the unemployment among those ages 16 to 19 has increased to 19.2% from 10.8% versus to 11.9% from 10.5% nationwide. And now you're seeing more and more layoffs actually in California at fast food locations, and not just layoffs, but reduced hours as a result of its new $20 an hour minimum wage. The issue here is that employers, when they need to cut costs or cut labor costs in particularly, they lay off and reduce their workforces among the least experienced and those with the least skills. And then the young people lose out on pretty valuable learning experiences, as Bill was just talking about. I think one of the problems these days, you often hear about employers complaining about the young generation Z, and they don't know how to behave in the workplace. And I think one of the reasons is they just haven't worked enough minimum wage jobs. And that actually the data there, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics bears that out, that workforce participation among youth, the teenagers, has been declining for the last couple of decades. It picked up actually a little bit during the pandemic. But fewer young people are working minimum wage jobs, flipping hamburgers, and maybe they view those kinds of jobs beneath them. But they do teach important skills. They teach you how to behave or interact with customers, colleagues, superiors, take orders. And we do know in the modern workplace that is becoming an increasing issue with young people just not knowing how to comply with orders issued by their superiors.
Hang tight. We'll be right back in a moment. Welcome back. Another policy issue that is being raised is inflation and price inflation On Monday, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania, and Oregon Senator Ron Wyden sent a letter to the president and CEO of McDonald's asking for more information about how it sets its prices. Here's part of what they say. They say, while McDonald's is not the only fast food restaurant that has increased prices significantly in recent years, its dominant market position as the largest fast food chain in the United States has an outsized impact on American consumers. And Bill, the level of detail that 3 United States senators want to get into about the pricing decisions of McDonald's and its franchises strikes me as somewhat astounding. So here's one of their questions. How does McDonald's make pricing decisions on individual menu items? And is that price increase justified entirely by an increase in McDonald's input costs? Please provide a detailed accounting. How often does the company reevaluate prices? Apart from the $5 meal deal, has McDonald's lower prices on individual menu items? If no, please explain why not. Bill, am I wrong to be astounded by the idea that there would be congressional oversight of a restaurant chain's pricing decisions at that granular of a level?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to, if you were dependent on burgers, do you want Ronald McDonald deciding the prices, or do you want Liz Warren doing it? It's absolutely ridiculous. Remember, the companies they can't just raise them to the roof. They have to be conscious that if they raise them too high, they're going to lose customers. That's basically the argument of the minimum wage. You raise it and you price workers out of the equation. They're too expensive, and you look for alternatives. You either don't replace people or you find mechanization or something. It's ridiculous. I wish the corporations would write to the government and say, could you give me a detailed explanation of the economic analysis you use for the Inflation Reduction Act? Did you consider the effects of your spending money we don't have? They could never write that. And it's classic federal government. They did things that resulted in inflation because they spent money we didn't have. When the companies respond to the increased costs they have, they then accuse them of price gouging or somehow cheating the American people. It's absolutely ridiculous. One thing that neither candidate really got to, apart from the food at McDonald's, which is popular for some people, the convenience for the kids and so forth, just the job training that it goes to. Like, they point out the 1 in 8 figure for people that work for McDonald's. The biggest thing is in the labor market is mobility. When you have a mobile labor market, what I mean by that is a booming economy creating new jobs and prospects. Then you have places people can go. And you look at that 1 in 8 figure, a lot of these people aren't at McDonald's now. You have to follow some for 20 years or so and see how well they're off. And a lot of people who started in minimum wage jobs, I think I got a nickel over the then minimum wage, which was $2.75, later on moved on to other jobs. And the kind of people accusing McDonald's of price gouging, they're going to ruin that for everyone.
Another policy issue that this McDonald's stop brings up is the Biden administration's joint employer rule. Alicia, give us a sense of what that does to the franchise business model. And is that something that voters should expect a Kamala Harris administration would also agree with?
Right. So this joint employer rule actually goes all the way back to the Obama administration, actually before then, because there's been this push by the left to hold franchisors accountable for any kind of labor violations or issues. These aren't always real violations. Sometimes they're just union complaints at their franchisees. So with the joint employer rule, at least from the National Labor Relations Board, there's actually a separate rulemaking at the Labor Department. This would essentially allow unions to organize workers across franchisees and then petition their franchisor, the McDonald's, the corporations, to recognize the unions. I mean, the really goal is to leverage the pressure on the parent companies to agree to the unionization of the franchisees. And what you would also have is that the franchisor here, McDonald's, would probably dictate a lot more of the labor practices and other terms of working conditions at the franchisees, and which McDonald's really doesn't want to do, and neither do the franchisees. They essentially reduce the number of franchisees. Right now, about 95% of McDonald's restaurants are actually franchised, and McDonald's would become probably a lot more, stingy in the franchise licenses that it gives out because it knows it's going to be liable for any kind of labor violations at those restaurants. So you're really going to reduce the number of franchisees. So that's one effect. And two, you're going to reduce the autonomy of these franchisees and also increase their costs because they're going to have to jump through these hoops and loops, training, all that the parent companies are going to impose on them as a condition of their licenses. This is why the franchisees have broadly opposed this rule. They opposed it in the Obama administration. The Trump administration reversed it, but then the Biden administration Biden NLRB, which is, for all intents and purposes, is the same thing, brought it back. And Harris has supported it, and she's supported the PRO Act, which would actually codify it into law, because right now it's actually been blocked by the courts, and the NLRB rule has. But the goal on the left is actually to codify this and a bunch of other, pro-labor gifts in the PRO Act. And Harris has, she's indicated that she'd support breaking the filibuster so that Democrats could actually do that. But I think that this is something you really have to worry about in a Harris administration.